What actually is development? I believe it is more than reasonable to arrive at a definition of a concept before I critique or praise its implementation. But when it comes to development, actually pointing to something and going this is development is tough. As a term, it is vaguely, positively associated and has connotations of progress. And indeed, if I show you a picture of London in the 15th century and a picture of London today, we would agree, I would hope, that the London of today is more developed. But development is arguably a convenient term because of its vagueness. It communicates quite rapidly that this is better than this, without having to bring up changes in city sanitation, public transportation, job opportunities, or political progress. And this vagueness can be useful too. Today, when we wish to compare, and I do apologize for lack of a nuance here, the rich countries and the poor countries of the world, well, during the Cold War, a popular term was first world country versus second world country versus third world countries. And indeed, this distinction of third world country and first world country survives today. The issue with the third world, second world, first world classification, of course, is that it is a Cold War term, and on top of that has strict definitions, with first world countries being defined as those aligned with America, and whatever the concept of freedom happened to be that week. While second world countries are those countries that are aligned with the Soviet Union, and hence whatever the concept of communism meant that week. With naturally third world countries being the neutral countries, aka they entered a weekly raffle to determine the designated free war zone of the week. See Korea, Vietnam, or the Congo. The problem, of course, with associating third world countries with those other poor ones is Switzerland, for example, is a neutral nation. Famously so. It is also famously rich. Two properties as correct today as they were during the Cold War. This does mean that, strictly speaking, even today, Switzerland is a third world country. Another example of a strictly speaking third world country is, or well was, Sweden. Yes, that's Sweden, the country that invented Bluetooth, artificial kidneys, and the Paradox DLC policy. Insert joke about needing artificial kidneys to procure Paradox DLC here. Yes, see, until Sweden joined NATO on the 7th of March 2024, aka politically known as 5 minutes ago, Sweden was neutral, meaning that Sweden was, by all definitions, a third world country just over a year ago. Now, I'm sure we can all applaud Sweden's ascension to the ranks of the civilized, but also this obviously means, outside of amusing anecdotes and pop trivia, if you are, say, the United Nations, a formal designation of countries called third world countries, which includes everything from Austria to India to Mexico to South Sudan, that's not helpful. As such, within the realm of academia, where nothing is not controversial, so I say this as a generalization, well, they have moved towards the terms LEDC and MEDC, or less economically developed countries and more economically developed countries, which is more useful, but now we have decided that development actually is something we are using to rank nations. So let's see what current definitions we go with for development. Before we get to the country stuff, let's quickly acknowledge that development is also used as a term for everything from chess piece development to illness development to skill development. But that's not what we're talking about today, and hence that can all be ignored. No, in the case of countries, and hence the topic of our video today, development tends to refer to the buildings and infrastructure that, in general, exist in an area. Now, personally, I would argue that the institutions of the government also play a non-trivial part in determining the development of an area, as well as, for example, the education level, but let's keep things more simple and ignore that. Let's consider the building and infrastructure case. Can we say that more road or more rail means more development? Before we do, let's take a quick pit stop to say that a like would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. The move against Hollow Bean is proceeding as planned. We are closing in on his sub count by the day, hopefully ready to overtake any moment now. But let's leave all that aside to talk about today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is straight up the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, featuring over 2,500 tanks, planes, boats, and even helicopters from 10 major nations, ranging from 1920s armoured cars and biplanes all the way to modern fighter jets and main battle tanks. War Thunder has something for everyone. Furthermore, it doesn't use simple hitboxes and targets with hit points. War Thunder goes above and beyond with sophisticated vehicle damage models. Every vehicle in the game is intricately designed down to individual components, meaning that everything from engines to the guns are susceptible to damage and can be disabled by enemy fire. War Thunder also models the different types of armor, shells, and missiles which behave like their real-world counterparts. So, realistic graphics, incredibly detailed vehicles, and even authentic sound effects are waiting for you, as you are placed at the helm of the most powerful war machines of our time, letting you get immersed into the intense combat of War Thunder. I love the intensity it can offer with arcade mode, letting you pop into a quick, fast-paced match, and get some combat-based fun. Alternatively, enjoy simulator mode, where the guardrails are ditched for the most challenging environments, and finally realistic mode, which provides the perfect middle ground between the two, striking a balance between the authenticity of operating the vehicles and the intensity of battle. So join a worldwide community of over 70 million players who already partake in epic PvP battles today, and get right into the breathtaking experience that is War Thunder. The wealth of high quality content for you to discover and enjoy is unrivaled. There is nothing better for military history enjoyers out there. Play War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile devices, and make sure to use my link in the pinned comment or the video description down below to sign up. For new players, or if you're returning after an extended break, you'll also receive a massive bonus pack on PC or consoles that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator known only as the Eagle of Valor, as well as a casual 100,000 silver lions, on top of 7 days of premium. Now this is available for limited time only, so don't miss it. So, does more road or more rail mean more development? Well, no. Let's look at the United States, and let's look at railways. People love trains, they go choo-choo and move stuff around efficiently, including people. Good stuff. But they need to run on railway tracks, and America has 140,000 miles of railway tracks. My source is Google. Actually, for all of this, my source is Google. I'm not reading a 500-page book just to get to the source for the amount of railways in a country. This means that if the front page of Google is lying to me, well, this video is incorrect. Make of that what you will. Anyway, moving swiftly on. This 140,000 miles of railway. Does this get America 140,000 rail development points, which you can now compare to other nations? Well, no. Let's look at the railway network in Japan, which is considered by most people up there as the most developed nations in the world when it comes to their railway network. And pure lengthwise, Japan clocks in 19,029 miles. I do love that answer. America is out there rounding railway length to near 1,000, meanwhile Japan has figured it out down to the mile. Anyway, if we were just to compare the same metric, this would leave Japan with 19,000 railway development points, meaning that America has over 7 times the railway development points that Japan has. Is American rail 7 times more developed than the Japanese system? Well, arguably no. For one, the population of Japan is 124 million, compared to the American 340 million, meaning that right away, there's almost a third less people that can even potentially use the railway network compared to the United States. And then there's country size. Japan covers just under 146,000 square miles, while the United States has 3.8 million square miles of space. So railway development points need to account for population size, country size, and total length. And once all that is done, we can get a population length to density figure that we can then use as the railway development comparison, right? No. The United States, for one, uses a lot of its rail capacity for freight, while Japan mainly moves people. Furthermore, we have to compare station density, because it's all good having a long railway network, but less station does mean less people served. On top of that, we then have to compare frequency of said service, as well again as the purpose of the railway track. A bullet train line is great if you're trying to get to Tokyo, but how useful is a bullet train if you're involved in shipping, oh I don't know, Nintendo Switches or car components? Not very. To top all of that off, you can't just look at rail coverage and come to a conclusion from that alone. Rail doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the United States is a car-centric society, for better or for worse, which, compared to Japan, a lot of its logistics human distribution problems are solved through cars. In the same way it's unfair to state that Japan's infrastructure is worse because it has less parking spaces per person than America, it's dishonest at best to say that the Japanese infrastructure overall is better than American due to more dense railway coverage. For those wondering, it's 0.04 car parking spaces in Japan per person, compared to a staggering 5.4 car spaces per person in America. God, I feel so free saying that. America has over 1,000 times more development in the car freedom spaces department than Japan. Basically, my point is, I'm not comparing the development of Japan versus America, I'm just comparing in isolation the development of the railway system in both countries and trying to make a conclusion about the development of the infrastructure from both. And it's impossible to do so in good faith. Now, if we want to go beyond those two countries and compare global levels, well, it gets worse, because let's add complications like some more extreme examples, such as Hong Kong. Hong Kong has a huge population but tiny country size. As such, having a really well-developed railway line with just 152 miles of track. This would naturally mean that the amount of people per mile of railway in Hong Kong is an absurd 49,342 people per mile, compared to the American 2,428 people per mile. However, let's also consider the other extreme, Australia. Big country, rich country, and not a lot of people country. Australia, with its population of 26.6 million, clocks in an impressive 22,409 miles of railway, or 1,187 people per mile. Does this mean that Australia is twice as good at railway as America? Again, we're not considering things like electrification of the rail lines, we're not considering frequency of service, hell, we're not even considering the actual trains themselves. We're just comparing the railway length, and that's already proven to be a pointless exercise. As such, I think it's more than reasonable to state that amount of railways in a country cannot correlate to the logistic development of a nation. Development, however, despite being quite hard to quantify, is frequently used within Paradox titles. And indeed, let's explore 3 examples right now, using the domain of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's begin though with the ugly, get them out of the way, and unfortunately it does happen to be my go-to game of choice, EU4. So, here we are in EU4, and I've selected England because it is a nation I famously never play. Let's take a look at a province. Every single province in this game has a development value. It is quite that, it is literally the development of the province. The base development value on its own is then split into 3 values, the manpower, production, and tax development. Now, back in the release of the game, there was only a tax base, with production and manpower being added later as developments, ironically enough, on the development system. There are no road buildings. There is no railway you can build later, which makes sense in the domain of EU4, but there's no roads or highways, and the closest thing you can do to infrastructure is the expand infrastructure button, which costs admin points and is a separate system to development, although it affects development cost. And of course, the market, town, centers of trade, which you can upgrade or downgrade, which also affect development but also provide other small monetary bonuses. Within this domain, development, respecting both the tax, production, and military power, represents everything in terms of the economic system of EU4. And okay, that's only a slight exaggeration because of course there's also manufactories, which are represented as giving a flat bonus to development. The +1 local goods produced is the same as 5 dev clicks, as the main purpose of development in this case is to provide the 0.2 local goods produced and some other small buffs on the side, like local sailors, a very useful modifier on a non-coastal province. For those unaware, you can only get sailors from coastal provinces, meaning that the 60 sailors you would get from 1 point of development here is entirely wasted. And that's about it. Development is a number that usually tends to go up. You gain it by spending mystery magic mana points into developing your nation. You're able to get this development cost reduced quite significantly if you work for it, for example with things like prosperity, because when a nation is prosperous it is developing faster. I guess in theory it makes sense to the development edict when you encourage development, to even random events. Missions like abolishing villanage, modifiers like all power cost. So for example, if I were to obtain a golden age, I would get all power cost reductions from the golden age that would help me develop for cheaper. This development system then goes ahead to represent, again, quite literally everything in the game. There is no pop system, so population is modeled with development, but then you run into a fascinating issue for a game set in the 15th century. Namely, a country like England is arguably more developed and yet less populous than a place like India. There's only so much you can do with things like the Western Tech Group and priority institutions when it comes to mimicking that development. And again, the is arguably more developed feature here is still debatable because we're looking at the 15th century, not at the 16th century. This leads to two very weird developments. For one, the provinces in Europe are significantly smaller in terms of the actual square footage per province than they would be in other parts of the world. The most egregious example, of course, would be Australia, where provinces are absolutely massive in terms of their real-life counterparts, compared to what the same European-sized provinces are. Province density, because development gets more expensive to do if you have more development already, meaning that you want to spread out your development instead of concentrating it, but I digress. Province density really favors the Europeans, meaning that places like Australia are basically just screwed. But the more egregious cases are what happens around the edges when you actually play the game. You can lose millions of men in multiplayer wars and have no impact on the manpower development of your country. Again, fighting those massive wars has no impact on the production and taxation capabilities of your country, save for some events sometimes, and even that is a very reduced impact. You're able to birth millions of people overnight by taking a random province with no population, say for example the island of St. Helena, which I've colonized using the console command, and I've given myself some monarch points, meaning that I'm able to go ahead, I guess I'll state it, just so I can put the dev edict on, and let's take a look at what I can achieve here. I'm going to arbitrarily dev this province where there's arbitrary restrictions like taxation limits to development. Thank you, Paradox. I see why they exist, but again, they make no real sense. And after pressing the dev buttons a couple times, we have a 30 dev province overnight on a literal uninhabited island that didn't exist 5 seconds ago. 37 development, of course, implies a manpower, taxation, and production capability exceeding that of Beijing, the center of the Chinese Empire, and naturally we managed to build this industrial might overnight. In fact, and the night hasn't happened yet. We've done it within this domain of 1 day. We haven't unpaused. In a poetic twist of irony, it's actually made people reject a pop system for any sequels to this game, whether they be coming or not, because ironically this is a massive equalizer for multiplayer. The sources of mana points within the game are quite limited. They are limited to your ruler, to being able to get to 50 power projection, and running advisors. And naturally, of course, richer countries are able to afford better advisors earlier, but in a general sense, the amount of monarch points available to every country is similar for most people. This does mean that whether you're playing in England, or the Congo, or Argentina, or India, your monarch point income is surprisingly similar, meaning that your capabilities of development are also surprisingly similar. And in this way, a nation that just happens to be seeded into, say, Kilwa isn't at an inherent disadvantage compared to that of England. Of course, there are things that do in the base game give you an inherent disadvantage. The institutions spawning around, well, Italy, for example, for the Renaissance. However, considering the amount of times in multiplayer the meta involves deving the institution anyway, it's not even that big of a deal, and with a lot of MP mods literally removing the institution tech cost penalty and making institutions a literal optional mechanic, it works as a great equalizer. Namely, within the domain of EU4, you're able to dev any nation into a powerhouse. But if population mechanics existed and made sense, this would just not be possible. And ironically enough, it is the failure of the development system that allows this to be such an equal playing field. Buildings exist, of course, but they provide flourishes to development. Workshops do scale with the development of the local province, and while again, textile manufactories are usually given as the example of something that doesn't scale with development as they provide flat bonuses, first of all, flat bonuses do scale with development because high development lets you expand infrastructure. In the case of, for example, Lincolnshire here, I cannot expand infrastructure, but London has more development, so I'm able to. This gives me, as you can see, both local goods produced modifier 5% and production efficiency, which means that based on just those two modifiers, the plus on goods produced from the manufactory gives you a greater economic effect despite having the exact same trade good. To compare, London is giving 0.33, meanwhile Lincolnshire is giving 0.28. No workshops or other modifiers exist. Granted, the discrepancy is also because London has a seat in Parliament, which gives you production efficiency, so to compare and be fully equal, let's give Lincolnshire a seat in Parliament. And as you can see, when we consider the case of the manufactory, London, Kent, and Lincolnshire are all providing 0.3 because Kent is also an equally unexpanded seat in Parliament cost profits, so everything here is equal, apart from, of course, London having the expanded infrastructure, making the building that doesn't scale with development scale with development. That is it. The entire economic system of EU4 and inherently the system of running the country itself is built around the development of these provinces, in many ways to the detriment of the game. Beijing can be recreated overnight on an uninhabited island, and again in a poetic twist of irony, the Eurocentrism of the game is resolved because every nation is able to dev itself to the moon. The development system, I believe, is one of the greatest hindrances of EU4 as an archaic, frankly terrible representation of what development actually is. And the complete lack of actual interaction between the systems of taxation, production, and manpower mean that the multiplayer meta involves decreasing the amount of tax as much as possible, as it is the least profitable, running manpower for your armies and running production for your actual economy. It may be a somewhat controversial statement, but I'm going to say it. I do believe the EU4 development system, while being great for multiplayer, is holding back EU4 as a more recreational title for average enjoyment. Simply put, I don't think a system where you have to sometimes go spend your monarch points which you're using for other things, such as technologies, ideas, or even, in the case of milk points, breaching wars on enemy countries, or admin to core and expand your territory, having to choose between spending your monarch points on those things and spend your monarch points on development, and then making sure to keep up on development, but also to not over-focus on development, I don't think that works to the favour of Europa Universalis 4 as an enjoyable title. And hence, this is my submission for the ugly. But with that said, let's move on to the bad. A frankly reasonable attempt at modelling development, but one that is clearly still bad. I'm of course referring to Crusader Kings 3. So here we are, let's again pop into a game. At its heart, the Crusader Kings lineup compared to EU4 is a much more character-focused based game. You play a dynasty here, not just a country, meaning there's a lot more, well, gameplay around not just building up your nation and using your nation to achieve things, but actually playing as a character, going to feasts, doing events, that kind of stuff, right? This means that, first of all, the country management system is already relegated in some cases to more of a side thing compared to being the front and center mechanic as in the case of EU4. Development, for example, is one of the default map modes that is available at the start when you're selecting your nation. You're able to sort by development. But if you look at the Crusader Kings 3 map modes, well, you can sort by duchies and kingdoms and empire titles to see what would be any empires that you wish to become an emperor of, some kind of ambitions, to see the duchies where you can build up your land, for example, like seeing, ooh, I want to make a Lothian Albany-based kingdom, or something of that nature, right? There's a lot more of the focuses on the de jure and de facto medieval rulership. The religions are an option, as they would be in the other games. The cultures, of course, matter. The dynasties absolutely matter here. But development is relegated to a extra optional map mode, where high development is yellow and low development is purple. Development also is a bit more dynamic, for lack of a better word, is that it goes between 0 to 100. And the higher the development, the better. More development provinces bleed out to the provinces around them, and with the exception of perhaps if you're seeking a place to go hunting, in which case high development hurts your hunting chances, and if that's so much of an issue, just build the hunting lodges. Development is strictly positive, you just want more of it. Constantinople, followed by Rome, followed by Quertuba. This one here. Take the lead when it comes to development at the start of the game, and the AI tends to not really focus upon it. However, when it comes to looking at what the player does with development, and in general just playing the game, well, this is where the issues arise. Let's pop in again for a game into England, because I never choose to play England. Seems that England in 1066 had a couple of wars going on about it. I wonder if that's important. Anyway, we hate to look about development. And let's consider the development of the province, right? The development of London, for example, at the start is 13. This increases the supply limit of the province, indicating a higher level of infrastructure, and increases the amount of men as well as the taxes you're getting by 6%. At 100 development, this scales to 50% more levies and taxes. This is ridiculously strong. Combined with the fact that outside of the one DLC that no one likes, namely the Plagues DLC, which can rather harshly destroy development, development doesn't really go down. Well, you end up in a system where the best way of playing the game from an optimal squeeze out money and troops kind of approach is still go conquer the world, sure, but it's ridiculously easy to go to your court, get your court chaplain, tell him to go promote to increase development in a county, and that's it. After 10 years of this, you've solved the economy, you've solved manpower. Okay, maybe not if he's got 6 stewardship. We probably want to find someone a bit better. Like my vassal and lover, and former spouse. Anyway, of course there's limits to the system of development. There is a soft cap to development based upon your technological, well, development, as it were. For example, until you move into the high medieval and are able to access high medieval technologies, well, you need to research things like communal government to get the existing development penalty to be at 35 compared to 25, for example. So, yeah, it's kind of there. But considering that development also impacts your technology speed, it's really not that difficult if you play the game for more than 50 years to build up the development in your realm and in your culture to ridiculously high amounts, and then just charge to the tech tree while having all of the money and all of the manpower in the world. In essence, trivializing the country management aspects of a game all about pretending to be a king or ruler during the period. I remember looking at the dev diaries for when Crusader Kings 3 was in development, and when they talked about the effects of the buildings, for example, looking at the crop fields, they talked about how they would cost a lot of money, in this case 250 ducats, just to do what? Increase the taxes of the holding from 0.5 to 0.3? This is an abysmal return. Assuming zero development, a 0.3 increase in monthly taxes takes 833 months to pay itself back, on top of the 23 months it takes to actually build the thing. The problem, of course, are the percentage modifiers. This now gives you an extra 1% tax on the entire holding, and the base taxes of the province are quite impressive, coming from a lot of sources, for example the castle level and any buildings that you build, and of course unmodified by development. This very quickly becomes very, very high and very, very strong. And as you can already see here, my stewardship of this current ruler is minus 2%. But considering Crusader Kings 3, if you play around and start stacking modifiers and start stacking ruler traits like genius traits and making sure you get good educations and everything else like that, you're able to get some pretty absurd stats going on your characters, which again supercharge this number into the stratosphere. At its heart, Crusader Kings 3 is a role-playing game. I have frequently referred to this game as The Sims for men, but development as a modifier in many cases does trivialize the economic aspects of this game. That's not to say there are other things that don't trivialize it even more. An example of these absurd mechanics is, of course, England is a relatively rich country, but let's say you're playing somewhere poorer, like inside Central Africa. Not exactly a place flush with cash. Well, you can go hunting. Then you'll be able to go and get a hunting trophy, which you'll be able to sell for like 240 years of effective income. If you want to break this game, you absolutely can, but development is one of those weird mechanics where if you just want to sit tall and roleplay as a good steward of the land that builds up his land and doesn't let warfare come to it, you'll very quickly become the modern day Jeff Bezos and just sit on all of the money. And in many ways, the problem with having all of the money and all of the soldiers is that it trivializes a lot of the other, shall we say, more social aspects of the game. For example, since money is removed as a problem now because of the absurd scaling effects of development, and frankly just the scaling of this game entirely, any events where you have to choose between money or prestige, or money and something else, you just choose the prestige or the piety. If the choice is spending a resource which you have practically an infinite amount of, or upsetting a person is, well, it doesn't even matter if that person matters or not, you're just going to spend the money because you have 100,000 ducats in the bank. What is 50 ducats to make this guy not upset going to mean to you? Absolutely nothing. I think my greatest offense with this mechanic is that development, unlike other things, can be accidentally broken. You can go out of your way in many Paradox titles to break things, but development is broken by going to your council, selecting increased development, and that's it. You've won the economy if you just wait long enough. Again, make sure you appoint someone with a stewardship skill above 6. For lack of a better word, it can be accidentally broken, even if you're not trying to. And I think that, to me, is the reason it's knocked down into the bad score. But if you are just playing as a random person or a wanderer and just role-playing in that way, the game itself still holds up. So for me, despite the fact that development does to some extent take center stage here because you are ruling a medieval court, and a medieval court tends to have realistic issues with money, well, it is not as center stage as the case for EU4, and such I believe it is more forgiving. But not forgiving enough to not earn the bad title. So what Paradox game does development good? Well, here we are in Crusader Kings 3's predecessor, Crusader Kings 2. Let's take a look around, shall we? Let's take a look at a province. We're here in Wessex, and if we take a look at the bottom left of the screen, let's zoom in a bit. Every single province has a technology level based on the province itself. So, for example, Middlesex here has a different technological breakthrough level than Wessex does, meaning that if you look at the technology level and go, wow, the Skirmisher 1 technology gives 7.5 archer attack and 7.5 light cavalry attack, that's really good. No, bear in mind, that's on a province map mode base. That's on the province that has this innovation, it has this bonuses. And same for percentages. This keeper giving a levy size of 5% and a garrison size of 5% applies 5% levy size to just the province itself, or in this case specifically the building. So you see a lot more percentages, but a lot less places to use them. Anyway, there's the local technology point. You see the total country tax and the amount of country loot that is available. The total country tax being calculated by the provinces that produce a tax value. In this case, I am not getting a country tax value from the holding of this bishopric, as the bishop in question does not like me, or at least he likes me less than he likes the Pope. Meaning, in this case, that he pays his taxes to the Pope instead of paying it to me. But I digress. There's holding slots where you can see all the things that are built, the buildings inside of them if you care to look, and the people that run it. There's a supply system, a revolt risk, the culture and religion of the provinces, and its de jure holdings. In this case, Wessex is part of the Duchy of Wessex, which is part of the Kingdom of England. There's a prosperity modifier here that scales between +3 to -3, and at +3 you can gain extra holding slots through events. A grade building interface if you wish to partake in that. And on the extended province view, because of course you do have that, you can build a fort, you can build a hospital, or you can build a trade post if you're a merchant republic or are on the Silk Road and have access to building trade posts. Point is, there's no development and the game is fine. There's also no population system. Population is kind of represented by the holding slots. They're instantly populated, and when levies are used up for war, they don't disappear from the local population pool. But there is at least a manpower system, as it takes time for levies to recover, and development is mainly handled through the system of gold. You're able to build up. But as you can also tell by these construction times, development does not happen overnight. Of course, the option to speed up development still exists. In this case, the overseas construction. You're able to build things much faster inside the province in question. But there's no development passive spread, and in essence, the game is fine without it. In the most ironic sense, it also doesn't have roads or other logistic systems that you would expect in a system that goes out without development, but you don't need development in the game. You don't need that as a concept. It can arbitrarily just mean that a development of a province is just the value of the buildings or the holdings inside of it. I guess my main point of Crusader Kings 2, and I could have used Hearts of Iron 4 here as an example, although Hearts of Iron 4 development is used to refer to the building slots available in the province or the max infrastructure level. There's a whole mechanic around that. Anyway, it's more of a hidden mechanic. Regardless, in a game like Crusader Kings 2 or Hearts of Iron 4, you can have a good game without a development system. We will still understand concepts like Greenland is less developed than a Japanese metropolis. We can still understand concepts that England has more building slots than an Australian desert, right? That's fine. Development isn't a required system to fix problems, but at the same time, having development can come with a lot of detriments. In the ideal case, though, what would help Crusader Kings 2? Well, maybe if it did have logistics systems like a road system, maybe if it did have population. But I don't think Crusader Kings 2 would be improved by having a development score on top of the menu already. I don't think that's necessary. There's no reason to have an arbitrary plus 60% tax onto the province of Wessex. To be clear, I'm not arguing that development as a game mechanic is inherently bad. Again, it's not like ignoring development is a free ticket out of having problems. Now, what development does is it lets you simplify modeling infrastructure, population sizes, population educations, buildings built and developments, the logistics of the provinces, and frankly, the very concept of urban planning. And if your game has to choose between having a development concept or nothing, naturally it's better to have development than have every province or key location, whatever you want to call it, be practically identical. But as the game that you're making or you're playing in becomes more and more advanced, and the game itself models more and more systems, like say every non-abandoned Paradox Interactive title, bear in mind the more times you use a vague system like development, the more times you simplify concepts away behind a development number, the worse I believe your system becomes overall. And thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to grab it down below on your platform of choice, whether PC, console, or mobile devices, using my links, which you can find in the pinned comment or in the top of the description to get yourself a massive bonus pack, including premium vehicles, in-game currency, and more. With that all said, that is going to be all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Soda, W Haste, Still11, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Manhattan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grandma Flavia, Kono, Andrea Zalberg, Deki, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, Ace Napo, Gloricida, Xerxes, and Mr. Coomshock.